At my husband's work event, I caught him flirting with his coworker while I danced alone, pretending not to see me. When I confronted him, he sneered. "I'm not tied down. You can stay or leave, but I'm not changing." As I walked away, I felt a mix of betrayal and empowerment. His arrogance would cost him everything. I watched my husband's arms wrap around another woman's waist, his lips brushing against her ear as they swayed to music I could no longer hear over the roaring in my head. The champagne flute in my hand trembled, golden liquid sloshing against crystal, as Mason threw his head back and laughed at something Abigail said. He hadn't laughed like that with me in months. 12 hours on my feet at Pete's Diner had left blisters that stung against my rarely worn heels. I'd rushed through a shower, fought with mascara that kept clumping because my hands wouldn't stop shaking from exhaustion, and squeezed into a dress I'd saved for 3 weeks to buy, all to stand alone at his company's annual sales achievement dinner, invisible even in a room full of people. More champagne. A server paused beside me, tray extended. I shook my head, my throat too tight to form words. My wedding ring caught the light as I gripped my glass. The small diamond, nothing like the glittering rocks that adorned the fingers of Mason's female colleagues. 6 double shifts in a row had provided the money for Mason's new suit, the one that now pressed against Abigail's sequin dress as they continued dancing. He'd insisted he needed it to look the part of future sales director. I'd handed over my tip money without hesitation, believing in his dreams like I always had. "Claire, you made it after all." Sandra, Mason's office manager, appeared at my elbow. Her sympathetic smile told me she'd noticed what I was watching. "I wasn't sure you'd be here. Mason said you might be working tonight." My stomach clenched. He'd told them I wouldn't come? After all the arrangements I'd made to swap shifts? "I wouldn't miss it," I managed, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Mason's been working toward this promotion for so long. Well, our department couldn't function without him." Sandra nodded, sipping her drink. "Though between us, he's been distracted lately. Abigail's arrival has certainly changed the dynamic." My eyes returned to the dance floor where Mason now had his hand resting at the small of Abigail's back, fingers splayed possessively against her dress. The same gesture he'd used with me when we first dated 5 years ago. Before the mortgage. Before his ambitions consumed our relationship. Before I became the support staff in his personal life. "Excuse me," I whispered to Sandra, setting my glass on a nearby table. The path to the dance floor felt endless. Each step sent pain shooting through my arches, a physical manifestation of the ache spreading through my chest. Couples moved around me, their laughter and conversation creating a suffocating bubble I couldn't penetrate. I reached them just as the song changed. Mason's back was to me, his attention fully on Abigail, whose eyes widened slightly when she noticed me approaching. She didn't step back. Didn't remove her hand from his shoulder. "Mason." My voice was steadier than I expected. He turned, surprise flashing across his face before settling into something harder to read. "Claire. I didn't see you arrive." Clearly. The word escaped before I could filter it. Abigail's red lips curved into what might have been intended as a smile. "You must be the wife. Mason's told me so much about you." The lie was transparent. Mason had barely acknowledged my existence at the office Christmas party 6 months ago. I doubted his new account executive knew anything about me beyond my name. If that. "I need to speak with my husband," I said, my gaze locked on Mason. "Privately." Mason sighed, the sound heavy with inconvenience. "We're in the middle of discussing the Westbrook account." "On the dance floor?" The question slipped out sharp and brittle. His jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath his freshly shaved skin. "Fine. 5 minutes." He followed me to a relatively quiet corner near the emergency exit, the red sign casting an appropriately ominous glow over us. Behind him, I could see Abigail watching, not even pretending to look elsewhere. "What's going on?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "What are you talking about?" Mason checked his watch, the one I'd saved for 3 months to buy him last Christmas. "Don't insult me by pretending. I've been standing here for 45 minutes while you've barely left her side." He exhaled sharply. "This is a work event, Claire. I'm networking." "Is that what they call it now?" The words burned my throat. Because from where I was standing, it looked more like foreplay than networking. His expression hardened, eyes narrowing. "You're overreacting. This is important for my career." And what about us? What about our marriage? Mason's gaze drifted past me, back toward the party where Abigail still lingered. Look, I don't have time for this drama right now. The regional director is here and I need to make an impression. Answer me, I insisted, stepping closer. What's happening with us? For a moment something flashed across his face, guilt perhaps or hesitation. Then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. I'm not tied down. You can stay or leave, but I'm not changing. He delivered the words with a casual cruelty that stole my breath. This is who I am, Claire. This is the life I want. If you can't handle it, that's your problem. The ground seemed to shift beneath me. 5 years of marriage. 3 years of double shifts to support his career. Countless nights spent alone while he networked and climbed and built a life that increasingly had no space for me. Your problem, I repeated numbly. He checked his watch again. I need to get back. The awards presentation starts in 20 minutes and I'm expected to go. I stepped aside, my body moving on autopilot. Mason hesitated for only a second before straightening his tie, the tie I'd pressed this morning with hands raw from dishwater, and walking back toward the party. Toward Abigail. He didn't look back. I watched him go, feeling something inside me crystallize. Not break. Breaking implied weakness, shattering. This was different. This was hardening, strengthening, transforming into something new and unfamiliar. As I turned toward the exit, legs somehow carrying me forward despite the numbness spreading through my body, I caught Sandra's eye across the room. The pity in her expression might have crushed me an hour ago. Now it barely registered. Mason's arrogance would cost him everything, but not because I would take it from him. No, he would lose it himself, piece by piece, as I systematically removed the foundation he'd built his success upon. Me. The drive home from the event venue was a blur of streetlights and quiet sobs. I gripped the steering wheel of our second-hand Honda, the car Mason had deemed good enough for me, while he drove the leased BMW I helped make payments on. Radio off. Windows up. Just the sound of my ragged breathing filling the small space as I tried to process what had happened. Mason wouldn't be home tonight. I knew his routine well enough. The sales dinner would transition to drinks, then to someone suggesting a club or bar where the real networking happened. He'd call around 2 a.m., voice slurred, asking if I could pick him up. Or worse, he wouldn't call at all. Our modest 2-bedroom ranch house felt cavernous as I stepped inside. The silence pressed against my ears as I kicked off the painful heels and flicked on the kitchen light. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. Mason's coffee mug and plate from the eggs and bacon I'd made him before rushing to my morning shift. I'd been too busy helping him prepare for his presentation to clean up. I didn't wash them now. Instead, I walked to our home office, the small converted bedroom where Mason kept his work files and I paid our bills. My body moved on autopilot as I pulled open the file cabinet and withdrew the folder labeled Household. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, mortgage documents, the paper trail of our life together. I spread them across the desk, numbers swimming before my eyes until I forced myself to focus. The mortgage was in both our names. The utilities too. But the BMW lease was solely in his name, though my paychecks covered half the monthly payment. Our joint checking account showed a pattern even I hadn't fully realized until now. My deposits were consistent, regular. His were larger but sporadic, and our withdrawals told their own story. Restaurant charges and clothing stores I never visited. Golf outings I'd never known about. I opened my banking app and checked our savings account, the one we'd started for emergencies and opportunities, as Mason had put it. The balance was lower than I remembered. Scrolling through recent transactions, I found a withdrawal from 2 weeks ago. $3,000. No note. No explanation. Around the same time Abigail had joined the company. My throat tightened as I switched to our credit card statement. 3 charges at Stillwell's Jewelry. A hotel reservation in Chicago for next month. A sales conference Mason had mentioned needing to attend alone because the company wouldn't cover a spouse. I'd been a fool. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay on the living room couch, unwilling to face our bed, watching the ceiling fan rotate as I mentally calculated years of financial support, emotional labor, and sacrificed opportunities. At 3:17 a.m. my phone buzzed with a text from Mason, staying at Jeff's. Big breakthrough with Westbrook account. Talk tomorrow. Jeff was his sales director. I knew without checking that he lived in the opposite direction from where Mason's location showed on our shared phone tracking app, the feature we'd enabled for safety years ago. The blue dot placed him downtown, near the high-rise apartments where Abigail had mentioned living during a conversation I'd overheard at the start of the party. When my alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. for my morning shift, I moved through my routine with mechanical precision. Shower. Uniform. Coffee. But instead of making breakfast for two, I made just enough for myself. The small act of rebellion felt both petty and profound. At the First National Bank branch that opened at 8 a.m., I sat across from a personal banker named Tanya, my waitress uniform incongruous among the morning business crowd. "I'd like to open a separate checking account," I said, sliding my ID across the desk. "Just in my name." Her fingers clacked efficiently on her keyboard. "Any particular type of account you're interested in? Something with minimal fees that I can set up direct deposit with." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. By 8:45 a.m. I had a new account, a temporary debit card, and forms to change my direct deposit at the diner. Tanya had been kind, not asking questions when I'd mentioned wanting to keep my financial information private. The knowing look in her eyes told me she'd helped women like me before. At Pete's Diner, my manager Dave raised his eyebrows when I requested the direct deposit change but signed the form without comment. He did, however, pause before handing it back. "Everything okay, Claire? You look like you haven't slept." I forced a smile. "Just some household adjustments." During my lunch break, I called the credit card company and requested detailed statements for the past year, having them sent to a new email address I created that morning. I couldn't remove my name from the account without Mason's approval, but I could monitor it more closely. That afternoon, I found myself noticing things in our house I'd overlooked before. How the living room was arranged around Mason's gaming system. How my books were tucked into a corner shelf while his sports memorabilia dominated the main bookcase. How even the coffee mugs were organized with his favorites at the front of the cabinet. I moved my mug to the front. When Mason finally came home around dinner time the following day, unshaven and smelling of stale cologne, he barely noticed the small changes. He didn't comment on the empty coffee pot that usually waited for him. Didn't mention the missing breakfast plate. Didn't seem to realize I'd rearranged the magazines on the coffee table, placing my cooking subscription on top of his sports journals. "Rough couple of days," he mumbled, dropping his briefcase by the door where I would normally pick it up and place it in the office. It stayed there unclaimed. "But the Westbrook account is practically closed. Biggest commission of the year." "Congratulations," I said, continuing to fold laundry, only my own clothes in the basket now. His remained unwashed in the hamper. "What's for dinner?" He loosened his tie, eyes already drifting toward the television remote. "Whatever you're making." I stood, gathering my neatly folded clothes. "I ate earlier. Double shift tomorrow. I need sleep." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he merely shrugged and reached for his phone, likely to order delivery. He hadn't noticed that my wedding ring now sat in my jewelry box instead of on my finger. Hadn't realized I'd changed the password on my personal laptop. Hadn't seen that I'd removed my emergency contact information from his wallet and replaced it with his mother's number. Mason remained oblivious to my silent calculations, to the invisible ledger I was balancing with each passing hour. The same way he'd been oblivious to my worth for years. 2 weeks into my new financial arrangement, I found myself smiling genuinely for the first time since the company dinner. Mrs. Jenkins, a Tuesday morning regular at Pete's Diner, had just slid a crossword puzzle across the counter toward me during a quiet moment. "You seem different today, honey," she said, tapping her chipped red nail polish against her coffee mug. "Less hidden." I poured her a refill, considering her words. "Hidden? You always had this wall up. All smiles and yes ma'ams but nothing real behind it." She stirred cream into her coffee. "Today you look tired but you look real." I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been pouring into maintaining appearances. Not just for Mason but for everyone. The effort of pretending everything was fine had become so normalized I hadn't recognized it as work. "My husband and I are taking some space," I admitted, the words feeling strange on my tongue. I hadn't spoken them aloud to anyone yet. Mrs. Jenkins nodded, unsurprised. "Figured something was happening. You stopped wearing your ring last week." Had it been that obvious? I glanced down at my bare finger, the slight tan line the only evidence of what had been there. Don't look so worried, she chuckled. Most folks don't notice much beyond their own coffee cups. I just pay attention. That conversation opened something in me. Not a flood of oversharing, I still had my dignity, but a gradual lowering of the mask I'd worn for so long. When Mr. Peterson commented that his eggs were perfect as always, I admitted I'd been distracted lately and was glad they turned out well. When the morning rush left me frazzled, I didn't hide my exhaustion behind a forced smile. Strangely, the customers responded with more genuine warmth. Regular tips increased. The high school teacher who graded papers at table 7 started saving me the crossword puzzle from his newspaper. Little kindnesses appeared when I stopped pretending I didn't need them. On a particularly busy Thursday afternoon, I was juggling 6 tables when a man in his 50s sat at the counter, watching the flow of the diner with interest rather than impatience. He ordered coffee and the blue plate special, then continued observing as I moved between customers. "You handle the floor like a conductor with an orchestra," he commented when I refilled his coffee. I laughed, wiping condensation from a water pitcher. "If this is an orchestra, we're missing half the instruments. We're short-staffed again. You compensate well." He extended his hand. "Frank Mercer." "Claire," I replied, shaking it briefly before hurrying to deliver a tray of burgers to table 3. When I returned to clear his plate, Frank handed me his business card. "I own Riverfront Grill over on Spruce Street. Been watching how you work. You've got a gift for this business." I tucked the card into my apron pocket with a polite thank you, assuming it was just a nice compliment from someone who understood the industry. But Frank returned the next day and the day after that. Each time he sat at the counter, ordered something different, and observed the diner's operations with a professional eye. On his 4th visit he stayed until my shift ended. "Got a minute to talk?" he asked as I hung up my apron. We sat at a corner booth while the evening staff took over. Frank didn't waste time with small talk. "I need an assistant manager who understands front-of-house operations," he said, stirring his coffee. "Someone who can handle pressure, manage people, and still remember that Mrs. Wilson likes extra lemons with her iced tea." I blinked, certain I'd misunderstood. "Are you offering me a job?" "Training for a job," he clarified. "You'd start part-time while continuing here, learn the management side, and we'd see where it goes. Restaurant management is different from serving. More headaches, different rewards." The opportunity hung in the air between us. Unexpected, unasked for, and strangely aligned with the new direction my life was taking. "I don't have any management experience," I said. Frank shrugged. "Neither did I when I started. But you have instincts. That counts for more." I promised to think about it, my mind already calculating how I could arrange my schedule. The extra income would accelerate my financial independence plan, and the skills would give me options I hadn't considered before. Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Mason had finally noticed the changes in our routine, primarily because they directly affected him. The refrigerator contained fewer of his favorite foods. His dress shirts remained unwashed unless he handled them himself. The honey-do list I'd always maintained on the fridge had disappeared entirely. One morning, as he frantically searched for clean socks, Mason erupted. "What the hell is going on with you lately?" he demanded, slamming a drawer shut. "Nothing in this house works anymore." I continued eating my toast, unmoved by his outburst. "Things work fine. They just don't automatically work for you." His expression would have been comical under different circumstances. Confusion mixed with indignation. "I have the Peterson meeting in 30 minutes. I can't find my blue socks or the folder with my presentation notes." In the past, I would have jumped up, located both items, probably where he'd left them, and sent him off with a travel mug of coffee. Instead, I took another bite of toast. "Your socks are probably in the hamper where you left them. Your presentation notes might be in your briefcase." I sipped my coffee. "Or maybe Abigail has them." The color drained from his face. He hadn't mentioned her name since the dinner, had carefully avoided any reference to that night. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I replied calmly. "Just thinking out loud." He left in a huff, without socks that matched his suit and without the comprehensive notes I'd always helped him prepare before important meetings. Later that evening he came home unusually subdued. "Meeting didn't go well," he muttered, dropping onto the couch. I continued reading my book on restaurant management that Frank had lent me. "That's too bad." As the weeks passed, Mason's complaints about work increased. The Westbrook account was more complicated than expected. His director was suddenly micromanaging everything. The presentation he'd made had technical difficulties. What he didn't recognize was that the technical difficulties were me, or rather the absence of me. No one was proofreading his proposals for typos. No one was creating his PowerPoint slides with the animations he liked. No one was reminding him of client birthdays or preferences or which talking points had worked in past meetings. The invisible support system he'd relied on had vanished, and his career was showing the cracks. Meanwhile, I started spending 2 evenings a week at Riverfront Grill, shadowing Frank and absorbing everything I could about inventory management, staff scheduling, and food costs. The work was challenging in a way that serving never had been, using different muscles, both literal and figurative. "You're a natural at this," Frank commented one night after I'd successfully mediated a dispute between a server and the kitchen staff. "You see the whole picture, not just your corner of it." I realized I'd been seeing the whole picture for years. Managing our household, Mason's career, our finances, my own work. I'd been practicing these skills all along, just never getting paid or recognized for them. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of excitement about my future. One that had nothing to do with supporting someone else's dreams. The first sign that Mason had genuinely noticed my absence from his professional life came 3 months after the company dinner. I returned home from an evening training session at Riverfront Grill to find him sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and looking utterly defeated. "The quarterly numbers came in," he said without looking up. His voice held none of its usual bravado. "I missed my targets. By a lot." I set my bag down, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me, a small vindictive part one wasn't entirely proud of, felt satisfied. The larger part simply felt tired. Tired of the dance we'd been doing around each other for weeks. Tired of the marriage that existed only in shared bills and occasional stilted conversations about household maintenance. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I'd never wanted him to fail. I just wanted him to see me. "Jeff pulled me aside today. Said if things don't improve by next quarter, they'll need to reevaluate my position." Mason ran his hands through his hair, which needed a trim, another task I'd always quietly handled for him. "I don't understand what's happening. I'm doing everything the same as before." That was precisely the problem, but I didn't point it out. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, maintaining the physical distance that had become our new normal. "What do you think changed?" I asked. He shook his head, shuffling through papers. "Everything's disorganized. I can't find client notes when I need them. My presentations aren't landing right. It's like I've lost my touch." What he'd lost was me. My organization, my late nights proofreading his proposals, my reminders about which clients preferred which approach. But he still couldn't see it. "Maybe you need a system," I suggested, knowing how hollow the advice was. I had been his system. The following week, I arrived at Riverfront Grill for my regular training shift to find Frank beaming. The lunch rush had just ended, and he motioned me to his office. A small space off the main dining room that somehow managed to be both cluttered and efficient. "Remember the Westlake business I mentioned? The corporate catering contract?" His eyes sparkled with excitement. "They loved your menu suggestions. Said it was exactly the fresh approach they were looking for." Pride bloomed in my chest. Unfamiliar, warming. "Really? I thought those were just practice exercises." "Nothing's just practice in this business." Frank leaned back in his chair. "I submitted your ideas with our bid. If we get the contract, I want you handling it. Full supervision from planning to execution." I blinked, momentarily speechless. "Frank, I've only been training for 3 months. And you've learned more in those 3 months than most people do in a year." He slid a folder across the desk. "This would mean a proper title. Assistant manager. Salary instead of hourly. Benefits." The folder contained an offer letter with a salary figure that made my throat tighten. It wasn't wealth by any means, but it was stability. Independence. A future I was building with my own hands. Later that night, I returned home to find Mason waiting with an uncharacteristic gesture. Takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, candles on the dining table, and a small wrapped package beside my plate. "What's this?" I asked, setting down my bag. "A peace offering." His smile seemed genuine, if nervous. I've been difficult to live with lately. I thought we could use a reset. Part of me wanted to laugh at the inadequacy of his description. Difficult to live with hardly covered the dismissal at the company dinner or the months of taking me for granted. But I was too curious to refuse the dinner, too interested in seeing if he'd finally connected the dots between his professional struggles and his personal behavior. We ate mostly in silence, Mason making occasional comments about neutral topics. A new restaurant near his office, the weather forecast for the weekend. It felt like a first date with a stranger, formal and cautious. After the meal he pushed the small package toward me. Open it. Inside was a jewelry box containing a pair of sapphire earrings. Pretty but not particularly to my taste. They were the sort of gift a man buys when he doesn't really know the woman he's buying for, despite 5 years of marriage. Thank you, I said, closing the box. They're lovely. I've been thinking about us, Mason began, reaching for my hand across the table. I let him take it, noting how unfamiliar his touch now felt. These past few months, everything's fallen apart. At work, at home. I finally realized what changed. I waited, wondering if the breakthrough I'd been hoping for had finally arrived. I lost my focus, he continued. Got distracted by office politics and new accounts. But I want to fix things now. Get back to how we were. My heart sank. He still didn't see it. How we were, I repeated softly. Yes. He squeezed my hand. You were happier then. We both were. I want that back. I gently withdrew my hand. Mason, do you remember what you said to me at your company dinner? When I confronted you about Abigail. His expression clouded. I was stressed that night. I didn't mean. You said you weren't tied down. That I could stay or leave, but you weren't changing. I met his gaze steadily. Those weren't stress-induced words, Mason. They were honest ones. Claire, please. And you were right in a way. You aren't changing. But I am. I stood up, retrieving the folder from my bag. I received a job offer today. Assistant manager at Riverfront Grill. I'm taking it. He stared at me, confusion giving way to alarm. Wait, you've been working at a restaurant? I thought you were just picking up extra shifts at the diner. I've been training for this position for months. I start next week. Mason's face flushed. Were you planning to discuss this with me at all? We have bills, commitments. I've been covering my half of everything, I said calmly. Check the accounts if you don't believe me. That's not the point. He stood now too, agitation making him pace. We're supposed to make major decisions together. That's what marriage is. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. Like your decision to publicly humiliate me? Or the decision to withdraw $3,000 from our savings without discussion? Or perhaps your decision about which hotel to book with Abigail for next month's sales conference? His step faltered. You've been spying on me? No, Mason. I've been waking up. I took a deep breath. I've consulted with a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung between us, finally spoken after months of internal preparation. Mason's face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, disbelief. You can't be serious, he whispered. I've never been more serious about anything. I gathered the earrings and returned them to him. I don't want these. I don't want a reset. What I want is a life where I'm valued, not just useful. Mason sank back into his chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. All this time while I've been struggling, you've been planning to leave me? No. All this time while you've been struggling, I've been finding myself. I headed toward the door, pausing before I left the room. The divorce papers will be delivered to your office next week. I've already arranged for a place of my own. As I walked away, his voice followed me, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Claire, please. I need you. Those words, the ones I'd longed to hear for years, now came too late. He didn't need me. He needed what I provided. The support, the organization, the foundation I'd built that made his success possible. And for the first time, I needed something more than being needed. I stood in front of the mirror in my new apartment, adjusting the collar of my blazer. A simple navy one I'd found at a consignment shop but had tailored to fit perfectly. Professional. Confident. My reflection showed someone I was still getting to know. A woman with purpose in her eyes and determination in the set of her jaw. Today marked my official first day as assistant manager at Riverfront Grill. The small one-bedroom apartment I'd moved into 2 weeks ago still had boxes stacked in corners, but I'd prioritized setting up my closet with my new work wardrobe, practical pieces that bridged the gap between kitchen functionality and management authority. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Staff meeting at 9. Bring your A game. I smiled, remembering how Mason used to text me before his big meetings. Not with encouragement but with last-minute requests. Iron my blue shirt. Find my presentation notes. Pick up coffee for the team. The parallel between our career paths struck me suddenly. Both of us stepping into management roles, but with vastly different support systems. The morning staff meeting went smoothly. Frank introduced me officially, though most employees already knew me from my training shifts. I presented the new schedule I'd created, addressing concerns and explaining the logic behind shift changes with a confidence that surprised even me. "You're a natural," Frank commented afterward as we reviewed inventory in his office. The kitchen staff actually listened instead of grumbling. "That's rare for schedule changes." I shrugged but couldn't hide my smile. I just explained the why behind the decisions. People respond better when they understand the reasoning. Most managers never learn that. Frank handed me a thick binder. "Speaking of understanding things, I need you to familiarize yourself with these vendor contracts. We'll be renegotiating next month." The responsibility was daunting but exhilarating. For once, my organizational skills and attention to detail were being valued rather than expected and overlooked. That afternoon, my lawyer called with an update on the divorce proceedings. Mason had finally signed the settlement agreement after weeks of delaying tactics and emotional appeals. The division of assets had gone largely as I'd planned, thanks to my meticulous documentation and financial foresight. "He seemed surprised by how prepared you were," my lawyer commented. "Especially about the separate accounts." I thought about the small acts of financial independence I'd begun months ago. The redirected tips, the separate account, the careful tracking of joint expenses. Those silent calculations had given me options when I needed them most. "When will it be finalized?" I asked, watching the dinner prep start in the kitchen through Frank's office window. "About 30 days. You'll be officially divorced before summer." The word, divorced, still felt strange, a label I'd never expected to wear. But it no longer carried the stigma of failure I once feared. Instead, it represented a conscious choice to value myself when someone else wouldn't. 2 weeks later, I ran into Sandra, Mason's office manager, at the grocery store. I'd been avoiding places where I might encounter mutual acquaintances, still adjusting to my new status. But her warm smile as she approached my cart suggested no judgment. "Claire, you look wonderful." Her eyes took in my relaxed weekend attire and the healthy glow that had returned to my face. "How are you doing?" "I'm good, Sandra. Really good, actually. I'm managing at Riverfront Grill now." Her eyebrows rose appreciatively. "That's a lovely place. Mason mentioned you'd found some restaurant job, but..." She trailed off, clearly recalibrating the information she'd received. I smiled, understanding the disconnect. "How are things at the office?" Sandra's expression shifted subtly. "Challenging. The Westbrook account fell through last month. Mason's been struggling to adjust." I nodded, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Not satisfaction at his difficulties, but confirmation of what I'd suspected. Without the foundation I'd provided, the cracks in Mason's professional facade were becoming visible to others. "He's not the same," Sandra added quietly. "Disorganized. Missing deadlines. Between us, there's talk of reassigning some of his accounts." I pushed my cart forward, ready to close this chapter. "I hope he figures things out." "Me too." Sandra touched my arm gently. "For what it's worth, many of us miss seeing you at company events. You always brought something special." That evening, back in my apartment, I reviewed the financial proposal Frank had asked me to evaluate. A potential opportunity to purchase a small stake in a new restaurant concept he was developing on the riverfront. The numbers were substantial, representing the bulk of my divorce settlement, but the projected returns were promising. I thought about Mason, about how he'd always controlled our major financial decisions, dismissing my input as uninformed. Now I sat alone at my small dining table, spreadsheets and market research spread before me, making calculations that would shape my future. 3 days later, I signed the investment agreement, becoming a minority partner in what would become Riverside Market and Eatery. a hybrid concept combining local food vendors with casual dining. My restaurant experience and Frank's business acumen made for a partnership that felt balanced and respectful in a way my marriage never had. "To new beginnings," Frank said, raising a coffee mug after we signed the papers. "Not a romantic gesture but something equally valuable: professional respect." "To serving our own dreams," I replied, clinking my mug against his. 1 year later, I stood at the entrance to Riverside Market and Eatery on opening night, watching the space fill with customers excited to explore the local food stalls and communal dining areas we'd designed. My investment had grown into something tangible, something with my fingerprints on every aspect, from the menu collaborations to the staff training program I'd developed. Frank approached, champagne flutes in hand. "We did it." "We certainly did." I accepted the glass, surveying the bustling market with pride. "Have you seen this?" He handed me the local business journal, folded open to a feature on dining trends. A sidebar highlighted recent changes in the corporate dining scene, including a brief mention of Mason's company restructuring their sales department. Mason had been moved to an internal support role, still employed but no longer client-facing. I folded the paper without comment and handed it back. Mason's career trajectory was no longer my concern, nor was it the measure of my success. My vindication hadn't come from his downfall but from my own rise, from discovering that the skills I'd used to support him had always been valuable in their own right. Later that evening, as I made rounds checking on customers and vendors, a familiar face appeared at the hostess stand. Abigail, the account executive from the company dinner that had started it all, stood scanning the market, clearly meeting someone. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away, recognition and discomfort flashing across her face. I approached with professional courtesy. "Welcome to Riverside Market. Are you dining with us tonight?" She nodded stiffly. "Meeting a client. I've heard good things about this place." "I'm glad to hear that. I'm Claire Evans, one of the partners here." The surprise on her face was subtle but unmistakable. "Evans, you're—" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "Table 15 is available by the window. The Hartwell Vineyard rose pairs beautifully with our special tonight." As I walked away, I felt none of the anger or resentment I might have expected a year ago. Abigail had unknowingly done me a favor that night, exposing a truth I'd been too busy serving others to see. My worth had never been determined by Mason's validation. It had always been within me, waiting for the moment I'd finally choose to serve my own dreams with the same dedication I'd given to his.